Calling international rescue.
Calling international rescue. Calling international rescue.
International rescue. Come in, please.
Thunderbirds, go!
Revolving walls, moving gantries, descending sofas. For the adults making the programme, a way of getting those damn puppets to move. The children in the audience, rocket fuel for the imagination and highly imitable. Seemingly repeated week after week, there were variations for each sequence. Sometimes alternative shots, sometimes alternative angles, sometimes longer ones. This week, as the palm trees fall back, we'll be looking at the launch sequence of Thunderbird 2, and after having examined every edit from each episode, we'll be presenting the longest possible version of not just each shot, but of the entire launch itself.
You're going to what?
At this point, you can either sit in judgment, or go and get your dinky or matchbox Thunderbird 2 out of the attic and play along. Thunderbird 2, in contrast to Thunderbird 1, has a slightly less formulaic sequence. Whereas with Thunderbird 1, you get a fairly straightforward sequence of wall rotates, cross on the gantry, descend into silo, pool opens, take up position, and Thunderbird 2's launch, perhaps because it's quite a bit longer, was a lot more variable week in, week out. In fact, it was so long that there were a couple of shots done in 1964 that didn't make it in until the final 2 episodes of 1966. And whereas with Thunderbird 1 we could relatively easily match 2 or even 3 alternative shots to the same point in time, thanks to the indeterminate length of Virgil's shoot and the Thunderbird 2 runway, it's not always easy to say whether certain shots are alternative angles or additional shots. Now the first shot is, of course, Virgil standing against the portrait wall. This mid-shot of him walking to the wall appears only 4 times in the series: Entrapped in the Sky, Pit of Peril, The Mighty Atom, and Day of Disaster. The rest of the series tends to use this shot to kick things off, though. Apart from in Alias Mr. Hackenbacker in Series 2, where Virgil talks as the wall revolves, producing the rocket-changing continuity error when they immediately revert to the original Series 1 set stock footage. There is only one version of the original shot used in the series, though. By combining the beginning of the shot from Pit of Peril and the end of the shot from Perils of Penelope, we get the longest possible take. On the other side of the wall, we have 3 versions. This version, and this concussion-inducing slide, were used roughly equally throughout the series, and this version only turns up in Day of Disaster. Although all 3 versions would have been shot at the same time, for some reason the ceiling in the lounge changes slightly, as does the lighting. The slide rotation occurs in 2 shots, which remain consistent throughout the series. Look out for the helping hand here. However, the close-up comes in 2 subtly different variations. In the studio, almost certainly nothing is moved, bar it seems the lights. But in the fictional reality of the series, are these 2 shots occurring at the same time, or 2 separate shots showing Virgil at different stages of the shoot? And if a YouTube video has no viewers, does it really exist? Now for our first glimpse of Thunderbird 2. We get the same shot throughout most of the series, filmed from the right side of the hangar, with Pod 3 curiously on the right-hand side of the frame. This shows the chute entering into the silo at a staggeringly steep angle. Talking of the chute, it appears that someone had the foresight to include it in the model of Thunderbird 1's hangar. Unfortunately, though, it goes in the wrong direction. Must be cowboy builders.
This sure is terrible. Yeah, I can't rightly believe it.
A second version of this shot, taken from the other side of the hangar, appears in The Perils of Penelope only. The Perils of Penelope is home to a few shots never seen again in the series, including this one of Virgil sliding down the chute. And now it's time for Virgil to enter the giant transporter craft, for which you get 2 versions. This one, used most of the time, and this one, where a piece of bracing for the set accidentally makes it into the shot.
We've done like you said, ain't we? Put blocks in and sheared it up.
Virgil's arrival into his chair completes with a shot of his legs, and the chair folding into position. Whereas Perils of Penelope presents us with this back-breakingly fast variation. We can see a wire on the foot of the chair here, and as wires cannot push, only pull, this shows that the cockpit arrival was filmed in reverse. So if you were watching on set at the time, this is what it would have looked like. Virgil's chair, with the help of another wire, now folds into position. We then cut to a close-up of him pulling a lever which causes the simultaneous slide retraction and the extension of the yoke. The slide then disappears back through the opening, and it's only in Trapped in the Sky that we see the chute retract in the model shot. which is probably reverse footage. The arrival of Virgil's uniform into the cockpit was apparently a late addition, as it was felt he gained his uniform from nowhere. This doesn't appear to have been much of a concern for Scott in Thunderbird 1 though, even though his uniform was mentioned in the original scripts. Amongst Virgil's many talents, it appears that he's a master of the comedy quick change, as seen in these successive shots in Vault of Death. And now it's time to select the pods. There were, as every child knew, 6 pods which could be loaded with an array of exciting equipment. Pod 3, the elevator cars. Pod 4, Thunderbird 4. Pod 2, a bed. Yes, the possibilities were endless. The arrival and selection of the pods was shot from 2 angles, with variants where each pod was selected. Possibly not the most exciting day's filming, admittedly. We then get a brief shot of Virgil pressing a button to begin lowering onto the pod, at which point the distance between the pods magically widens to allow the wings free passage. Once again, evidence that shots could be framed on individual merit rather than with an eye on continuity. Although it's nominally used in the series, there is the odd one out, or should that be, the odd 2 out. We never see Pod 2 being selected in the series. Well, that is, not until we did the 2015 adaptation of the mini-albums, where we gave it its brief moment of stardom. A couple of times in the series, in Edge of Impact and Security Hazard, we get shots of Thunderbird 2 at rest on the pods, but this appears not to have been factored into the original shoot, as these shots are but a few frames looped from the end of the lowering sequence. The passenger lift could occur at any point during this sequence, floating in from God knows where. Now we go outside of the hangar and see the rock face descend. In the series, this comes, as so often for editing purposes, in 2 versions, a long shot and a close-up shot. The editor would choose the moments he needed for the action to flow dynamically. But if we piece some of these selections together, we get the entire descent of the rock face and metal interior door. Because Pod 3 was selected in Trapped in the Sky, for which all this footage was originally shot, it means Pod 2 is always on the right-hand side of frame, no matter which pod is selected in other episodes. And then we hear for the first time the familiar whir of Thunderbird 2's engines. The sound effects were a key component of Thunderbirds, giving credibility and weight to these fiberglass models on wires. Many of AP Films' sound effects were brought in from outside libraries. However, John and Jean Taylor also provided a number of effects. John went to Little Rissington Airfield during production of the Super Mario Nation shows and recorded a number of dynamic, real-life aircraft sounds, from exciting planes of the past, such as the Vulcan and Comet.
This is a Comet 4 taxiing past.
Thunderbird 2 exiting the hangar was shot from left and right. Again, these shots are run at variable lengths in the series. However, if we go to Ricochet, where the sequence is reversed to show the return to the hangar, note the smoke going backwards, and combine it with an earlier, or later, depending on which way you're playing the footage, part of the sequence from Trapped in the Sky and Moving You're Dead, we get pretty much the entirety of the original shot. We've even got a few frames of footage with the colour chart. For the palm trees falling back, we get 2 alternative angles, which are often used in conjunction. The head-on shot is longest in give or take a million, which has a night filter on, which we've graded out here to restore the original look of the shot. And then off the machine trundles down the runway, and again it becomes difficult to work out which shots are supposed to be sequential and which ones are supposed to be simultaneous. A fair amount must have been filmed for this, because this shot doesn't turn up till Ricochet, and this one until give or take a million. Twice in the series we get a mid-shot of Virgil filmed through the window, which is part of the original 1964 shoot. Occasionally in the series we get alternatives, but these would have been filmed later. And now Thunderbird 2 takes up its position on the ramp. This standard shot is used throughout most of the series, while this 3/4 length shot turns up in Sunprobe, End of the Road, and Give or Take a Million. In Trapped in the Sky only, we get a shot of Virgil pushing a button to raise the ramp. And if you look carefully, or perhaps not so carefully, you'll notice this support suddenly appearing to hold the giant transporter craft in position. The sound of the ramp was, incidentally, according to special effects director Sean Whitaker Cook, taken from the sound of the local coal train. Then we cut to the opening of the blast shield and... well, almost. For editing purposes, the length of time between the blast shield opening and ignition could be varied from episode to episode.
interesting. Now get to your post, Lieutenant.
And off she goes, nearly clipping the ramp on the way out of frame, and giving us a brief glimpse of the top of the sky backing. Curiously, there are 4 variations of Virgil at the controls during takeoff. These appear to have been shot at the same time, possibly as part of the original 1964 shoot, even though the shot does not appear in Trapped in the Sky. Thunderbird 2 heading into the air doesn't seem to have been factored into the original shoot though, as we get 3 variations of this shot, filmed with different models throughout the series. Unlike Thunderbirds 1 and 3, the landing doesn't seem to have been part of the footage shot in 1964. Danger at Ocean Deep, shot in 1965, is the first time we get to see Thunderbird 2 land, and this sequence was shot especially for the episode. Oddly though, although the first shot of the transporter craft approaching the runway was reused in Security Hazard and Ricochet, the rest of the sequence was reshot with a different model for Security Hazard. Also in Security Hazard, we get a shot of the palm trees returning to standing position, but this appears to be a reversal of a shot filmed as part of the original shoot in 1964 and seen only once before in Terror in New York City. As with Thunderbirds 1 and 3, the Thunderbird 2 launch sequence was reshot in Technoscope for Thunderbirds Go. The blastoff was also refilmed for Thunderbird 6, possibly to avoid the generational loss that would have occurred by duping the Thunderbirds Go footage. For some reason though, none of the reshot sequences look quite as good as their television counterparts. And now it's time to see the original sequence in its entirety, using the longest possible version of each shot. Next time for Thunderbirds Unseen Extra, join us as we take a look at the Thunderbird 3 launch sequence.